Daisy.
And I'm Terry.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 250.
Wow, that is a big number. And this week, it's Daisy's turn to share something with us. Daisy, what do you have?
Well, Terry, as I mentioned before, I think I've done 2 Jim Kwik episodes in a row, but I did mention that when I was originally looking for some episodes from him, I made a note of a couple more episodes that I found interesting and wanted to do. And this is one of those. And I think you will appreciate straight away why it caught my eye. It is called How Reading Emerged as the Most Effective Way for Restorative Rest with Claudia Hammond. And you might not remember, but I have actually shared from her podcast. Well, actually, I think it's a radio show on BBC4, but, it's on the radio and then they put it out as a podcast as well, called All in the Mind. And I forget what the subject was now, but I do remember sharing from her because I remember telling you about Claudia Hammond, but she is a broadcaster, author, psychology lecturer, and podcaster, radio host. And she has a new book called The Art of Rest. And the podcast really, well, obviously it's about the book, but Jim says it challenges our culture's obsession with being busy and productive. And also that rest doesn't equal sleep. They're not one and the same. So Jim kicks off with, well, what is the difference then between rest and sleep? And why is it important to focus on both? So Claudia says that both matter. Sleep has begun to be taken more seriously. As we know, we've shared some podcasts that we've listened to, and it's, there are quite a few books about it. Matthew Walker, Dr. Bruce, we were talking about the other week. There are lots of people talking about this now, and people taking it more seriously, giving it more priority, and actually starting to move away a bit from this. Always got to be busy, busy, busy. But rest is what we do while we're awake. But it needs to be restful, restorative, and it should replenish you. And it could be all sorts of things. It's highly individual. Taking a break of some sort, having a cup of tea, exercising. The key to it is what feels restful for you. So obviously that's going to be different for different people. If you feel better than you did before, after your period of rest, if you feel relaxed and restored, that is rest. It takes you out of yourself for a little while and away from your worries. And apparently the book is based around the REST test. This was carried out in around 135 different countries around the world, among about 18,000 people. So Jim asks her about this test and the findings. And she says that she worked with people from all sorts of disciplines with the Welcome Collection on the topic of rest, and everyone approached it and looked at it in different ways. So apparently there was a historian, there was a musician, so everyone was, had different interests, different disciplines. It sounds really interesting, actually. I'm quite interested in maybe going away and reading this book. Which says that rest is not always particularly well defined, and how we interpret it is interesting, and this was kind of her approach. She wanted to know, what do a lot of people, and it was a lot of people, 18,000 people, think about rest? The study took the form of an online survey, and they asked all sorts of questions. Apparently it was quite a long survey. It took about 40 minutes to complete. But some of the things they asked about how much rest people got. And did they want more? Did they feel that they needed more or less rest? And did they think that they had more or less than the average? And then there were all sorts of other things like the personality types, etc., etc. It must have been a lot of questions if it took 40 minutes. So I imagine the book goes into a lot of detail about the findings. But a few things that she brought up was that 2/3 of people said that they wanted more rest than they were getting. And she says, maybe people took part in the survey because they weren't getting enough rest, so it might be a little bit skewed like that. You can never completely tell. On average, from the survey, people got 3 hours rest the previous day. But apparently 5 to 6 hours rest from the previous day, from the participants of the survey, equated with the highest levels of well-being. As is so often the case, more is not necessarily better. So it starts going down again at around 11 hours. She mentioned, that could be from people who are unemployed and, maybe feeling stressed and miserable about that and not having enough to do, people who are sick, laid up in bed, whatever. Could be all sorts of reasons. But it's not a case of just more is better. 5 to 6 is about the optimum. It's just 5 to 6 hours sounds like quite a lot. But what counts and feels like rest to you? And that could be all sorts of things. So it could be cooking. A lot of people find, cooking the evening meal restful. It could be looking out of the window on your train journey commute. All sorts of things might be restful to you. And I put a little aside note here that maybe it could be a good reframing opportunity here. She said, well, you might have a hellish commute. Your commute might mean standing up and being squashed in amongst people, and it really isn't pleasant. But you might look at it as an onerous task, but maybe it is something that you could tap into. Are there any benefits from this? Can I get a window seat and look out the window and get a view of nature if not being in it? I don't know. It just felt like there might be a little bit of an opportunity there to reframe some things to make them count as part of this rest quota in the day. And well-being levels are twice as high amongst those who feel like they get enough rest. Now, Jim asked her, were there any surprising findings? And she said that, yes, one of the surprises was that socializing and sort of connection type activities, talk about this a lot, the importance of connection and socializing with other people in lowering stress levels. But actually, they didn't appear in the top 10 or even the top 20. And the difference there was that they were enjoyable, but not really restful. And the top 5 activities, annoyingly, they didn't tell us what the top 5 activities were, but the top 5 activities were things that people tend to do while they're on their own. So maybe actually being on your own and away from other people is important when it comes to rest. And she was saying one of the reasons for that might be that we don't need to consider other people. We're not sitting there thinking about, should we be saying something? What did I just say? Analyzing conversation, whatever it is. We're not thinking about anyone else if we're just on our own. And, it can be stressful and mind occupying being with other people. That's not to say it's not enjoyable, but is it restful? And she was saying even extroverts, and there were obviously questions that took this into account in the survey, but even extroverts who you might expect to say that social activities were restful didn't. Enjoyable, but not so much restful. They still listed solo activities up there, in the top. I think they were asked, the question was, what are the 3 activities that you find most restful? And from what they were saying, Jim said something about, and I think he might have misinterpreted this because it sounded a bit weird to have it as a number on its own, but maybe, I don't know. But he said that being on your own was number 3. So I'm not sure about that. Put a big question mark by that. But number 2, the second most common thing that people listed, was being in nature. 53% of people who completed the survey listed it as one of their top 3. Now, number 1, given it away in the title, but number 1 is reading. 58% of people said that they found reading restful. And she said that one of the things about reading, and as an aside here, I'm going to include audiobooks in this. They didn't mention the difference between the two. And they didn't actually go on to talk an awful lot about the whys and wherefores, probably do in the book. But the things they did say, which I'm going to mention now, apply completely to audiobooks as much as a real life book in front of you. So I'm going to count them as the same things. But one of the things about reading, she says, is that it takes you out of yourself and into a different world. Whatever it is, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. And she says it's well known as a good jumping off point for daydreaming. And this has probably happened to you when you're reading a book, you get to the end of the page or the end of the chapter in an audiobook, whatever it is, and you suddenly realize, I don't actually remember anything of what I just listened to. And you have to go back because you've just gone off daydreaming. And apparently she says this sounds like a bit of a judgmental term. It's sort of known as mindless reading. But she says it's not a bad thing unless it's not daydreaming, but it's ruminating. There are plenty of benefits from daydreaming, like creativity. And interestingly enough, daydreaming was number 8 on the list of things that people found restful. And Jim says, he has such wonderful little short quotes, doesn't he? He says, reading is to your mind what exercise is to your body. And we know he's big on reading. I think we've both we've both at least started on the reading faster thing with Jim Kwik, haven't we? But as usual, he gets right down to the questions that you want to ask. And he says, what are the minimum number of minutes you need to qualify as rest? Can you squeeze something into a really short break of just a couple of minutes? Like maybe when you're at work, for example. And she says, yes, actually, there's been some really interesting research on micro breaks, and they can make a real difference. She says, we quite often make breaks a reward for finishing something. All right, I've got X amount of time left. I'm going to put my head down and have a break. And depending on, how far ahead that is, she says, actually taking a quick break first, taking quick breaks have been proven to improve focus and productivity. Might actually be better to take a quick one now if time persists. Again, a couple of minutes. And she mentioned a study done in South Korea where, I assume this was in an office, workplace environment, they took 2-minute micro breaks every hour to do whatever. Doodle, look out the window, few stretches, go and grab a cup of tea. An hour later, their attention levels were higher, and at the end of the day, their well-being was higher. So she says, really think about what you find restful and then work out how you might be able to fit them into some micro breaks throughout your day. Jim mentions this concept, people who don't feel they have time to rest or they feel guilty about doing something that is not productive. He asks her, after writing this book and not presumably, a lot of research that went into this, how has it changed her approach to rest? What has her key takeaway been? And she said, well, first off, she gives herself permission to take rest, and she looks at it as being valuable. It's a way to protect her mental health and take care of herself. And the other thing she wanted to say was that busyness can become a bit of a badge of honor. Some people like to shout about it. It's a claim to status. But we shouldn't be valuing busyness for its own sake. And we should really start to take rest more seriously, as it is so valuable to our mental health. And that was it. That was a nice, quick episode, but a real teaser for some more in-depth, interesting stuff to be got from the book, which I might go on and, not read, listen to. But yes, it caught my eye because and I've mentioned many times that I'm an avid audiobook listener, and depending on how long the book is, I can often get through a book a day. And, that sounds like a lot. And obviously it does depend on the length of time of the book. But yes, that sort of 5 to 6 hours she was talking about. And again, it sounds like a lot, but you're not doing it in one block of time. I'm listening. I usually put my audiobook on pretty well as soon as I wake up. I'm listening to it while I'm doing the washing up. I'm listening to it while I take the dogs out for a walk, while I'm driving to and from, taking the dogs, driving to and from wherever I'm going. If I'm driving, while I'm eating. I know you're probably not really supposed to do that, supposed to mindful eat, but anyway, I do. And quite often, especially if it's a book that I'm really into, I'll go on and listen to it in the evening and maybe do, my colouring in app or a jigsaw or something, and I won't bother watching any TV. And I'm usually listening to 15 minutes as I go to sleep as well. So you can see actually how those little bits and pieces quite quickly add up in a day. And So I wonder how much that feeds into my well-being, and I suspect quite a lot from what she was saying. I would classify it as restful. It certainly takes me out of my own mind. Yes, sometimes I do the daydreaming thing, and sometimes if I'm really worried about something, there'll be a risk of spiraling into that. But I was thinking about it earlier and just remembering, going back to when I was a child, and when you tip over that tipping point of being able to read really well and being able to read yourself and read, proper long books, and just losing myself in the world of books and just absolutely loving it. You just, lose yourself into your imagination and the stories people tell you. And I think audiobooks, I was talking about them to my dad because he's not an audiobook listener. My English brother, used to listen to them. He has dyslexia, and so he used to listen to books rather than read books when I was reading books. And I used to kind of, I'm not really into that. I'm all about reading books. And then I was, snobby about a Kindle instead of paper books, but I got into that. And then I did start getting into audiobooks. And I was saying to my dad, actually, it takes on a different life. It is very different. A paper book you read, there are pros and cons to both. A paper book that you read, yes, it's your imagination that fuels that. It's in your imagination that you hear the voices and you picture the scene, and just everything comes from you. Whereas an audiobook is a performance. Somebody is reading it to you. Well, I said to my dad, there is a really big difference, and this is where the importance of the narrator comes in. And funnily enough, it was in a book where they were saying, in a book that I was listening to, where she was talking about writing a book and having to choose a narrator. And they were talking about the importance of a narrator and how people will often select books to listen to because they recognize the narrator. And I have absolutely done that. I will, unless it's a book I really know I'm not going to be interested in, if I see it's narrated by Richard Armitage, I'll get it. Because he's a fantastic narrator, and a really good narrator just brings it to life, and you lose yourself in the performance. They really get all the accents going really well. And there's a massive difference between having a book read to you, which is how a bad narrator is. And boy, now I think because it's taken off so much, there's such a high level now of expectation with the quality of what you're going to get with an audiobook performance that we're just not accepting that having it read to us anymore. It stands out straight away. And so, well, as you can tell, because I'm babbling on about it, I love my audiobooks and I love getting lost in them. I love getting lost in the world, and especially when I get into a series, I get to know the characters and love the characters and really look forward to the next one. And yes, I'm a fiction, crime, mystery, thriller, detective type. That's my standard. But I'll throw the odd non-fiction in there. Like I say, I'm interested in this one. I've got another one queued up that I bought the other day to listen to. So that's the other thing, actually, with non-fiction. I find it a really easy way to read them. If it's a physical book, I struggle more to find the time to get through them. But as you've heard, I listen to audiobooks while I do other things. So if there's a non-fiction book that I need or want to listen to and educate myself with, it's a really easy way for me to do that. I'll quite often go and buy the physical book as well because I want to be able to look at it. Sometimes, especially with non-fiction, you kind of need the book as well. But yeah, anyway, so I will shut up now and let you speak after my exuberance about audiobooks.
Well, there's so many cool things in there. I was thinking, you were talking about, you said something about reading a story, and I thought, oh my gosh, isn't that why kids like to have people read them stories at bedtime? It relaxes them. It calms them.
It's restful. It helps them get to sleep.
Yeah. In some ways, I was going to say it tires you out, but it relaxes you to the state where you can sleep, because otherwise, you put the little kid in their room and they get up and get the toys and then they start talking to the sibling. But wow, if they've got their mind listening to a story and they start to get sleepy, I definitely use them a lot around sleep. They help me go to sleep. Audiobooks, if I wake up in the middle of the night because I have a dog that needs to go out. And then once I'm awake and I've gotten up, it's like, oh, shoot. I just put on an audiobook and I don't even make it through a chapter. I mean, I don't even know if I make it through 3 minutes. It just really calms me and lets me get back to that sleep state. The other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking, Daisy, is that I'm fascinated by the idea that sounds like they didn't quantify what rest is exactly.
No, not at all.
They're asking people for their perception of whether they've had rest. So, for example, before we started recording, I was telling you that my partner enjoys riding the bus up to the ski mountain where we go. And, it's about a 45, 50-minute drive. And she loves riding the bus. And, so many people think, oh, I'm never going to ride the bus. Oh, no. But I really think for her, it's a relaxation thing. She doesn't have to be paying attention to traffic. She doesn't have to be thinking about the time of when she's going to get there. She can scroll on her phone. She can look out the window. She can listen to conversation that's happening on the bus. She can talk to someone on the bus, but it's very different than when she's driving. And so, someone might say, oh my gosh, I rode the bus for a half hour today. It was so stressful. Someone else can say, I rode the bus for a half hour and it's so restful.
Yeah.
So it's so much about our perception of whether we've had enough rest. It reminds me of going back to Kelly McGonigal and other people talking about stress. It's really how we think about things, whether we interpret it as stress or not, of what effect it has. And so similarly, do you perceive it as rest?
Yes, exactly. And that's where I put that in brackets, that there might be a reframe opportunity. And I mean, the only way they quantified it or qualified it was that rest is, do you feel better than you did before you started that rest period, however long it was, 2 minutes, 2 hours? Do you feel better than you did before? Do you feel relaxed? Do you feel restored? Did it take it sort of out of yourself and your worries? And that might be going for quite a hard physical run, for example. That to somebody might be rest.
That's right.
And I did wonder when you were saying about Erin finding the period of time on the bus restful, and when we were talking about, how you might find your commute more stressful because you were crammed in and standing up. But I think even with that, actually, if I had nice big, external sound cancelling headphones on, listening to your favorite audiobook or listening to some music or something like that, could you maybe kind of zone out, meditate with your eyes open, listen to what you want, and actually get a bit of rest, even though you're not in particularly restful environment? What they're saying about if it sort of takes you out of yourself, is there a way that you could take yourself out of a stressful situation when you're standing there not having to do anything else, rather than sort of getting irritated? Is there a way that you could actually turn it into a period of rest?
Another example, I think, with audiobooks and reading actual handheld books or Kindle is on an airplane. Why do we all do it? I don't think it's just because we're captive audiences. For me, it distracts me. It makes me not think about, I'm up in a metal tube, being quickly propelled through the air. This shouldn't even be possible. I don't think about that because I'm in the story, or I'm in the, there was one book I remember listening to on a flight. It was Untethered Soul. And I went into such a meditative pre-sleep kind of state that his voice just felt like my thoughts. And it was so restful. So as I was thinking about when and where do people read, people often read at night in bed, restful. On an airplane, restful. The other thought I had earlier when you were talking about it, and we've talked some about this in previous episodes, but there's so much pressure, as you said, about being busy and multitasking. And the reality that multitasking is not more efficient, but we're kind of taught, oh, you should be able to do 3 things at once. When you are talking about your audiobooks and the way I experience audiobooks, I don't feel like I'm multitasking. And I think, I don't have the real words for it, but I think why it still feels restful to me. Like I can be cleaning the kitchen listening to an audiobook and think that was
I was going to say that about washing up. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not usually something that I would consider a restful activity. But it's because my mind has a place to be. So I'm not thinking, oh my gosh, I have to do this and then I have to do this. And why is Gracie doing this? And I'm not mulling over a lot of other things. There's this place for my mind to be that's, like you said, if it's fiction, it's in this other world, it's in these characters' lives, it's listening to the dialogue. Or if it's nonfiction, it's in these concepts that I can just kind of rest in there versus being bombarded with lots of other things from the external real world that's going on.
Or even feel really energized by learning something new and interesting. That's still rest.
And then I was wondering, you didn't list in the ones that you shared watching television.
Yes, I don't know. They only mentioned 3 or 4. So yes, I'm sure there are lots more listed in the book. But no, they didn't mention TV, no.
Because for me, I think that is definitely one that I would list if I did that survey. However, what I choose to watch greatly affects whether it's restful for me or not. And then I was thinking more about it and I thought that's probably why I stopped watching certain shows. We were watching for a while the show Killing Eve.
Oh, I love that.
And I loved it at first. And then I just couldn't watch it. It was stressful, I think. It was like, oh my gosh, no, don't do it. Oh, wait. Oh, why did they do that? It's just like this. And again, there might be times where I want to be engaging that way and watch a show. But I do watch TV before bed. I want to be in a more restful place. And that's not restful to me. And so it's just interesting to think even the same activity, depending on how I'm doing it or what in these reading and watching examples of what content I'm engaging with, it can feel restful to me or it can feel stimulating.
And that's a great example of how 2 people will look at the same show differently. I mean, I loved that. And I wouldn't say I found it, I don't want to use the word restful. I wouldn't say I found it calming. I found it energizing, but I would list it as restful. I felt because if you take their categorization of that, do you feel better than before? Do you feel relaxed? Do you feel restored? Yeah, it took me out of myself. I enjoyed it. Yeah, it was quite an energetic, engaging thing. But for me, I would classify that as being restful. But for you, not. So it's completely individual. For my brother in the UK, he's always found cooking restful. He enjoys cooking. He finds that restful. My mum, I don't know whether, maybe she found the actual cooking process restful. I'm not sure. But she used to get quite irritated by having to choose what to cook. But somebody else would find cooking a real chore and not enjoy it. But I loved what you said about being able to turn an activity that you might not enjoy that much into a period of rest by allowing your mind to go into rest. As you were saying about, tidying up or whatever, I was saying about doing the washing up. Washing up, I wouldn't list washing up as being restful, as an enjoyable task, but it becomes not an onerous task because I'm listening to my book at the same time. So yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it?
And it's very validating because, as we've spoken about in previous episodes, we like to listen to a lot of audiobooks. Maybe if you'd caught me 6 years ago, it would have been, I like to sit down and hold a book. I so rarely do that now.
I've definitely felt validated. And remember, they had to list their top 3. So here's a question for you. What would your top 3 be?
Oh, jigsaw puzzles. Audiobooks, and I would say watching certain types of programming, certain types of shows.
Mm-hmm.
And yours?
Well, obviously audiobooks, and they probably would be at number one for me. Yeah, I think the being in nature. I think, I'm going to wrap my dogs up in that. I'd be very unlikely, unless I'm doing it with somebody else and the dogs can't be involved for some reason. I wouldn't go out for a walk on my own unless I'm going shopping or, walking for a purpose other than dogs. For me, being in nature, going for a walk in nature is completely wrapped up in spending time with my dogs. So I could maybe squeeze 2 in there. 2 for 1, because I would definitely list my dogs there somewhere. The third one, yes, I don't know really. It would be a tie probably. Again, I could probably include different things like this sort of gardening and looking at plants with being in nature. I could probably squeeze quite a few different things into that second one. So yes, I mean, maybe a really enjoyable TV series that I get into. I get a lot of enjoyment when I watch something that I really like, that you really get addicted to and look forward to watching the next one. I just don't watch as much as I used to. I used to watch a huge amount of television. And certainly that was probably when I was tipping into that too many hours of rest a day, when they mentioned that earlier, that too much is not necessarily a good thing. And, linking back in with the depression and things like that. So, yeah, interesting. I didn't really give you a straight answer there, but
I think you and I both share a trait around complicated to pick these kinds of choices that for me are like favorites.
Yeah.
When people are like, what's your favorite thing? It's like,
depends.
So many. Yeah, it depends on this. Yeah. And yes, absolutely. So even what is most restful? Like then when you said spending time in nature, I'm like, oh yeah, that is super restful. But how often do I use spending time in nature as my source of rest?
Right.
Not often.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes for me now, my time in nature is like riding a long bike ride, skiing, doing things that are not restful per se. They're enjoyable as heck, but
you don't find them restful. See, somebody else might.
That's right.
That's yeah. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Interesting that slight definition there between enjoyable and restful.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say there can't be you would expect and hope there would be a big overlap. Yeah, so quite a short little one that I had a feeling it might trigger a bit of a discussion. I knew there were things we would be talking about, things we had in common.
Very good. You can always count on Jim Kwik to bring you some good mind-stirring thoughts.
Yes, and I'm a fan of Claudia Hammond as well. Okay, well, until we see each other next time, I hope you have a very restful, and everybody else at home has a very restful week.
Take good care, everyone.